Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Woman podcast with me, your host, Kate. And today I have the delightful Chasca Summerville. She is an Ayurvedic practitioner and the founder of Alchemy of Ayurveda, a holistic health and wellness practice based here in Australia. She is an authority in the field of Ayurveda with her book Ayurvedic Rituals, published internationally by Hardie-Grant Books. With many years of experience in the health and wellness industry, Chasca has dedicated her career to helping individuals achieve optimal health through the ancient wisdom of Ayurveda. Chasca's offerings include Ayurvedic Diet and Lifestyle Consultations, her signature 3-day Ayurvedic Reset program, and the Ayurvedic Rituals book, and is a regular host of engaging workshops and retreats. Her vision for women's wellness is for women to feel empowered with knowledge about their cycle and the practices and rituals that they can do to support themselves throughout any season. And also for women to feel deeply connected to their bodies, to be intuitive with their needs, and to have the knowledge to restore balance without the need of pharmaceuticals. So welcome to the show.
Quite an intro. Thank you, Kate. I'm really happy to be here today.
And we were just talking actually about, as I was reading this intro, we were just talking about the book and the power of the book really simplifying the teachings of Ayurveda. And also you made mention about, many of the teachings being presented, particularly in textbooks, in a very masculine kind of way. And yet you've taken something really similar to what I've done actually with the yoga teachings, taken them and run them through the lens of women and women's health and applying this much more feminine understanding. And you've done something really similar with Ayurveda. So I wonder if we first begin with you sharing the season that you're currently in, and then how you came to the teachings of Ayurveda.
Yeah, so I'm basically just in my menstrual season. I don't have children. I had a really long and quite treacherous journey with my menstrual cycle. I had endometriosis pretty much from my first period when I was about 13.
Mm-hmm.
So, my first experience of menstruation was really painful. I remember not telling my mum. I sort of hid it from her for a few months. I was embarrassed to tell her. It just felt like it wasn't necessarily shame around it. I didn't know. I wasn't given any resources to confide, to seek counsel, to ask for help, to ask for guidance. It was just like, oh, okay, this is happening. I think I'd seen ads on TV about pads and tampons.
Mm-hmm.
Was just kind of buying them myself. Like I look back on it now and I just think, wow, it's like so far removed from the way that, it was an initiation for thousands of years where a young woman would go to her mothers and her aunties in the village and they would be initiated and they would be given the red tent ceremony and they would go and join these women and they would often all bleed together within the same village. And it was such a ceremonial rite of passage. And, we've just come so far away from that kind of really ritualistic and supportive, connected community mindset to this very singular, isolated. And, it wasn't necessarily my mum's fault that was the environment. It was just that was what she had experienced. And
Yes.
we often just pass down our own experiences. But I think in this moment, in time, there's a big revival of these ancient practices and they've kind of gone full circle and they're really coming back to the spotlight and the forefront. And it's amazing now because we're educating and empowering women and mothers especially about how they can support their children, their daughters when they're going through these different phases of life. So I think that coupled with, a long history of predominantly, I'd say the lineage in the women in my ancestry was very disconnected. It was just, I think, a lot of women having to work really hard to survive, having, unhappy relationships or marriages, that sort of thing. I think that just was carried down in my womb for for many generations. And my mum also had painful periods and that sort of thing. But I started experiencing the symptoms of endometriosis, not having any idea what endometriosis was
Of
for another
course.
15 years after that,
Yeah.
just going
Wow.
through huge, just really stressful and really painful times each month. And it was just like, I knew there was something, I just knew it was really painful. And I'd speak to my mum and she was like, oh yeah, that's normal. I had painful periods. You just take the Panadol and you just get on with it. So I did that for so many years. And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I came to Ayurveda after living a pretty toxic lifestyle. I'd say I was living in Melbourne. I was working in the film industry. I was working a lot in doing music videos, late night photography, burning the candle at both ends, and just being so disconnected and out of touch with my body. But I did have a yoga practice. But I mean, in those days, I was doing yoga more for the physical benefits. I thought of it as a form of movement, of exercise, flexibility. It was more about how I guess I looked, how I felt in that regard, rather than now knowing the true essence of yoga and, the whole beautiful science behind it. But then it was just sort of, it was more superficial, I guess. But through that yoga practice, the whispers of Ayurveda and things like that started to trickle in. And I definitely felt a natural inclination towards it. It was like everything that I heard was like, wow, that makes so much sense. And that's so beautiful. And I pretty much had been a vegetarian since I was about 13. I just felt intuitively that was right for me. And it was mainly based on, animal advocacy back then. I didn't believe that I wanted to eat animals. So Ayurveda being largely plant-based was resonating. It was just all of these things like herbal medicines and things like that didn't have side effects that started to all kind of click into place. And once I really looked into Ayurveda, it was all of the things that I loved. So I started, getting into it. And while I was in that process, I started to go within and started to look at myself and my body and my cycle and my skin and my, digestion and my sleep and like all of the realms. It's like none of them were looking great. And I was realizing pretty quickly that I was very out of balance and very out of touch with myself. And, I was, I had such bad digestion for so many years, and I literally never even knew it. I never even inquired about it. I never explored it. I didn't know what healthy digestion looked like. I was eating all the wrong foods for my body type. I was just living in this life that was so out of touch and so disconnected from the essence of Ayurveda, which is the essence of, natural, healthy being. So when I started going down that path, it was like, okay, I can't keep taking painkillers every day, every time I get my cycle. So I was taking them for, 4 or 5 days every month. It's like what that does to your gut and your system, your all of your systems is so taxing and so alarming. So it was like, okay, I need to stop doing this. So started looking at alternative remedies and not having much success because I hadn't actually found the root cause, and I hadn't actually done any of the deeper work. So taking, alternative herbal painkillers wasn't enough. So that really just started my whole journey with Ayurveda. And what really ended up healing that, relationship with my cycle was yoni steaming was a big part of it, which was so revolutionary for me. But I think in the process of yoni steaming, it was this inquiring and this connection, having this connection with my womb. So doing the yoni steaming, but also really opening up the channels of dialogue between my mind and my womb and asking, what was going on, what was stagnant, what was needing my attention. And through that, having huge amounts of clarity and huge amounts of forgiveness and reconciliation and repair for the way that I'd been treating my womb center, which is, the core of our femininity, and the connecting point to the lineage of women before us. So yeah, it was a huge process, and Ayurveda really brought me to that. And it was, within a few months, I started having a lot more ease and flow with my cycle, and was completely painkiller free within a few months of really taking that practice very seriously. So long story short, that's where I'm at, and that's sort of one of the arms, I guess, that led me towards Ayurveda.
Yeah, it's such an amazing story, and one that I'm sure many women who are listening will be able to resonate with, because like you say, a lot of those ancient practices, rituals, ways of even viewing the body in a more holistic way have really, you know, gone underground, been lost, however we want to describe it, and they are really making a comeback, and women are talking about it. And I think a big part of that is, access to information. There is, we have this phenomenal technology that, there's always the yin and the yang of it. There's, the beast of social media that has, many negative connotations, but also many positive ones, where younger women in particular are able to access, or are more likely to stumble across, information about the menstrual cycle, able to connect with other women who are moving through similar menstrual health conditions like endometriosis that we didn't have when we were, in our early teenage years. And as you were speaking, it made me think about, how much you as a young woman, and how many other women there are in the world, that as a 13-year-old menstruating and not really having access to, women who are moving through similar circumstances or having those rites of passage, it's a lot to hold for a young person moving through this major transition, this major rite of passage when we step over into, that very first menses, and then beyond. And it really speaks to, I think, for women who then are not able to do the healing work themselves, that then when they get to those stages of fertility and pregnancy and birth, it, like you say, it carries those imprints from our lineage through into those other phases of our life as well. And the thing that I love about Ayurveda and yoga, of course, is the self-inquiry piece, and the piece that you were speaking about around working with the womb space, having dialogue and communication with her, and also this concept, I guess, of self-healing, this self-empowerment, that we don't need to be continually looking outside of ourselves for, this modality or that modality or this practitioner or that practitioner, that we're actually able to, once we have the foundations, we're actually able to do the large portion of healing and deep connection and self-inquiry ourselves.
Yeah, and it's just about creating that language within, from our conscious mind to our inner world. Our body is so amazing and quite vocal. It shows us so many different ways, through imbalances, through pain, through, just different irregular movements, fluctuations, cycles in digestion, in our, menstrual cycle, and all of it. Our body is giving us, I call these little love notes. It's like these little love notes that come from within and go, hey, this part of our body needs some attention, and this part needs some love. This part is holding on to something that might need some reconciliation or some forgiveness. So you're able to receive all of this innate wisdom, but we have to, first of all, create the space to allow that to come through. And secondly, just trust it and honor it when it does. And every time we do that, it becomes stronger and stronger, and our intuition grows, and it becomes so apparent that we can really start to notice things before they become bigger issues down the line.
Yes, because it starts really then with the wisdom, is what I'm hearing you say. It starts with the wisdom piece, having the knowledge and the education around, okay, well, what is the menstrual cycle? What are the phases, which we're going to dive into? What are the doshas? How does this relate to me? And then being able to make those lifestyle changes, then supporting, diet and nutrition, And then from that place, you really set up the most optimal environment to be able to have the moments of self-inquiry, right? Because you're toning down some of the inflammation, you're softening and calming down the nervous system. So it allows for that perfect kind of ground foundation to then have those moments of self-inquiry, to actually feel like you can connect in with womb space, and that you're able then to, like you say, refine the intuition and actually hear the messages that you're receiving back. So I wonder if perhaps we dive into menstrual cycle. Let's talk about the menstrual cycle through the lens of Ayurveda. Let's talk about this real feminine approach that so much of your work is centered around, to give the women who are listening a deeper understanding of the menstrual cycle through the lens of Ayurveda.
Yeah, and I think at the essence of the menstrual cycle through the lens of Ayurveda, it's really cherished as the most honorable aspect of being a woman. So without menstruation, there's no conception, there's no child rearing, there's no society. Like, the whole of humankind really relies on menstruation, and more so healthy menstruation. So at the essence of it, it's really the most important and powerful and honorable and creative aspect involved in our whole society. So honoring that, both from it's all well and good for us as women to honor that, but it's also really important for men to understand and to be able to support women throughout it. And also for children, for women who have got younger children or teenage children, it's really important for the kids to know what's going on, why it's going on, what it means, how they can support their mums through it. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a society with women who have healthy menstrual cycles, the future of our race is very jeopardized. So Ayurveda really puts an importance and a value on keeping the conditions of the body healthy and happy, honoring the doshas, so each phase of the cycle, and supporting women throughout that. So just for anyone who's listening who doesn't have, a great concept of Ayurveda and the doshas, the doshas are known as functional forms of energy. So they're basically comprised of one of the 5 great elements. So everything on earth through the Ayurvedic lens is made up of varying quantities of ether or space, air, fire, water, and earth. And each of the doshas are mainly predominant in one of those elements, or 2 of the elements, but Vata is known as ether and air, so it's very light and buoyant. And Pitta is comprised largely of fire and a little bit of water. And Kapha is earth and a little bit of water also. So all of these elements have different characteristics and different traits, and they show up within us physically, they show up in our environment, times of day, times of our cycle, times of our lives, different seasons. So what I really like to describe them as is tools for restoring balance. So when one of the doshas is out of balance, we can use the qualities of the opposite dosha to bring it into balance. So this kind of wisdom is really powerful for being able to become our own healers. So bringing ourselves back into balance on a daily basis, because we all have little fluctuations within us all the time. And, we often suppress them, ignore them, or let them go. And, what we really need to be doing is bringing them back into balance on a daily basis so they don't accumulate and become bigger issues down the track. So with all of the doshas, the 3 doshas, we have 3 to 4 different phases within our menstrual cycle. And each of these doshas just let us know what's happening within our body, so which elements we're being dominated by, and what we need to do to support them, to not aggravate them, and to balance them out. And that changes throughout the cycle. So if we begin on day 1 of our cycle, and let's just say we'll use a 28-day menstrual cycle as an example. It's normal to have a cycle anywhere between, say, 24 days and 31 days. That's pretty consistent, but generally we menstruate, and our menstrual cycle is aligned with the moon cycle. So let's say for the process of this example, we'll go with a 28-day cycle, and day 1 is the day that you get your bleed. So that starts day 1. So this is when we enter the Vata zone. So Vata is, because it's light and it's air, it's responsible for movement in the body. So this is where our body triggers an activation of Vata, which is responsible for the downward flow of our menstrual cycle. So that's where we can release. Our menstrual cycle is just releasing, and it's flushing out, and it's cleansing. It's like this little self-cleansing system and process that happens in the body. So Vata is responsible for that movement. Now, that movement, if it's not flowing downwards, it's known as the Apana Vayu, then we can see things like, just really dry menstrual cycles, really short menstrual cycles, painful. So Vata is responsible for pain. So when we're having a lot of pain with our cycle, that's showing us that there's excess Vata in the body. And things that can impact this downward flow of energy is really simple things like spending too much time in your head, your thoughts, spending too much time thinking, too much time talking, too much time socializing. If you think about that downward energy, it's going up. So it's going up into our head. It's consuming all of our energy. So that's going to really affect the downward flow, which is affecting the release of our menstrual cycle. So what we need to be doing during this Vata stage, so that's for as long as we bleed, we should be bleeding for roughly about 4 to 5 days. If you're experiencing really short bleeds, sometimes people have them just for 1 day or 2 days, or they're really, really light, then you can see that there's a blockage in that downward flow of energy. So we need to be spending this time really anchoring down. So getting all of that energy out of the head and into the body. So slowing down, going within, and we can practice this throughout the month as well, just having a lot more time alone, introspection, meditation, grounding down, Abhyanga, self-oil massage, all of the self-care practices that bring us back into our body and out of our head. Just pulling back. A lot of us are so used to being surrounded by partners, kids, family, friends, co-workers. We are constantly chatting, thinking, moving. All of those practices are perpetuating the accumulation of that air, that Vata in our system, which is very drying as well. So if we have, if you're seeing dry menstrual cycles, that's just very drying. You're all in the air element. We need to be coming back into the earth. So the earth is the opposite of the air. So Kapha practices, which are all about slowing down, going within, and just really honoring ourselves. And they say in Ayurveda, what you do during your cycle sets you up for the whole of the rest of the month, basically. So it's really important to carve out that time. I call it a little holiday from life. So it's where you relieve yourself of all of your obligations to exercise, socialize. Traditionally, women don't cook during their bleed. It's a time where they're nourished. So it's a time where they step back from more of the household chores, and their partners or the elders, the women, mothers, mother-in-law, they step up and they do more of the cooking and the cleaning and the things that they can do to support you during that time. It sounds amazing. It's difficult for a lot of women to have that luxury. And I think this is where educating men is so important. Because men think, oh, that's all well and good for you. You get to have this 4 or 5 days of the month where you don't have to do anything, but once they actually understand the importance of this, and once they understand that that actually allows you to step up for the rest of the month, to show up, to do all the things that you need to do, you actually need that time and that support so that you can do it with a really good energy and outlook. Like if you get to your premenstrual time, and we have a lot of premenstrual stress, tension, depression, a lot of aggression coming up, that's often because we haven't had this time during our bleed to honor ourselves, to relax, to retreat, to go within. Like it's the season of a woman. We need to replenish. It's like the night. It's the nighttime. It's like when we sleep can be likened to when we're menstruating. That's our time of healing and recovery, so that we can then wake up in the morning and be fresh and ready to go and ready to extend that energy for the rest of the month. So During that time, we want to have a lot of warming and grounding practices. So that includes warm foods, soft foods, so like porridge, semolina porridge or rice porridge, even, barley or oats is fine, but just something warm and grounding. And then, lots of khichdi, dal, soups, curries, like gentle foods that are warming and unctuous, but you don't want to be really testing your digestive system at this time, because when the digestive system is activated, all of the other processes in the body have to take a bit of a backseat. So this time is really about honoring the detoxification of the womb. So we need to allow the space and the energy to do that. So stripping everything back, simplifying everything. It's even a time when we wouldn't do abhyanga, we wouldn't do self, pampering practices, because anything we're doing externally on the body, including, showers, baths, oil massages, all of these things interrupt that downward flow of energy. So traditionally, women don't bathe, they don't shower during their bleed. That would be very hard for us these days to have 4 or 5 days.
Yes.
During that time especially. But if you can keep it to a minimum, then that's going to support that downward flow of energy.
Yeah, I have heard that. I wonder about like you mentioned, the reality for many women. I mean, we live in these modern times where things are really busy, but it doesn't have to be. It can be all the simple things, can't it? Like things like, trying to put it into context for people who might be listening who are like, this all sounds lovely, but, like you even said it yourself, that sounds good, but, we know that that's often not achievable for many women. And I was thinking about, this would be a time if I was teaching regularly to students, that I would be supporting them to have a home practice during this time, or that if they did want to come into studio for practice, that we modify their practice in a way that is more supportive, is more nourishing. So instead of, attending say if they were attending a vinyasa practice as an example, that they would shift across to a yin practice or a restorative class, because there's less talking, there's more spaciousness, it's more time for self-reflection, it's not as heating. A lot of the yoga taught in the West is too fast, too hot, too stimulating anyway, like on a day-to-day basis, irrespective of where women are in their cycles. But being able to support women to, make those modifications, go to bed a little bit earlier, have those warming foods, just create little, like small, really achievable shifts and changes. And you've got so many in your beautiful book that you share that women would be able to tap into and access. But it's interesting about the abhyanga. I didn't know that it's recommended not to do abhyanga during the menstrual cycle.
Yeah, so we can't actually digest the oil on the skin. So anything that touches the skin is interrupting with the downward flow of energy. So either the body decides whether to metabolize that oil and all of the energy is going to those external extremities, or it's going with the downward flow. So that's a time, where we step back from these practices. And as you say, it's like just about having this knowledge as a foundation, and then making the adjustments that you can in your life to support that. So, if you don't have a partner that's going to cook for you during these days, what can you do to prepare for that? And, exactly how you can refine your practices to slow them down. So we don't want to be doing any inversions during our menstrual cycle. We want to be allowing the blood to flow out. So things like tampons and moon cups are actually blocking the downward flow of this energy and also of the blood. It's designed, it's basically flagged as AMA, as a toxic residue at this point. The body wants to get it out. So when we're blocking that, we're interfering with that, and we're also holding on to toxins that the body's trying to get rid of. So people can have a moon cup in for 12 hours, sometimes longer. We're keeping all that, those toxins within us. So we really want to be letting them release from the body as quickly as possible. So that's why we're avoiding things like headstands or any inversions, which is stopping from flowing. But using things like reusable pads or period underwear is the best way. It's essentially free bleeding, in that you're allowing everything to flow out of you as and when the body is, inspiring it to do so.
Yes.
So really supporting it also through staying really hydrated, having warm teas, because we want to be supporting the release, supporting the hydration to allow the blood to flow, making sure that we're having good sources of iron. So you can even have that through nettle tea, raspberry leaf tea, eating your green leafies, but having them cooked, things like that to replenish the blood loss, so we're not feeling too fatigued by it. And yeah, just really taking this time to rest, to recover, to go within, sleep, find stillness. I really just think of it, as this sort of holiday from life, and just doing that in any way that you can, that suits your lifestyle, without creating too much tension, but just having that awareness and educating our partners and our family members so that they can support us during that time.
Yeah, beautiful. And then we move into follicular.
Yes, so then we're moving into the follicular phase, which is known as the kapha phase. So this is when we're more heavy in the earth element. So there's earth and water. So kapha is responsible for building tissues. It's really responsible in this phase for building the endometrium lining to prepare for housing an egg if needed. So during this time, this is when we get that, pre-ovulatory glow in the skin. So that's the water and earth element shining through. It's also a time where we can actually give more of our energy outward. So this is a really good time for, if you look back, primally, this would be the time where you're finding the mate. So your physical appearance is more dewy, golden, glowing, plump, vivacious, more fertile. This is a time where you would be out, meeting and mating. So this is the time that we can give more energy to socializing, to our family, to more, I think, like, this is the time where we host dinner parties. It's amazing if you have the opportunity to work with this within your work. So I book most of my speaking events, my workshops, retreats, things like that would always be during this time in between the bleed and ovulation. So it's that time we have more kindness, compassion, empathy, more excitement, more enthusiasm for being out and for mingling and socializing, that sort of thing. But during this time, because it is dominated by the earth element, we need to be more physical. So this is a really good time for any of those more intense exercise formats that we might enjoy doing. It's a great time for walking, more active vinyasa, warming up. So kapha is cold by nature, so we need a bit more warmth. So we can have more warming meals, but we want to keep the meals lighter. So this is the time when our metabolism is slowest. So we want to honor that by having lighter meals, more physical activity to really boost that agni, the digestive fire, to support yourself. And, doing more outside, so being within nature, getting some sun, warming up. It's also a really great time for learning. So doing online courses or learning new skills, things like this, where our memory is more intensified. So if you think of the earth element, it's very stable and grounded. It's like the old wise elephant. So we've got our memory retention is higher at that time. So it's a really good time to bring ideas to life. So during our menstruation, we can be more intuitive and more connected with the cosmos, and more connected with our spirituality and our creativity. So that's the time for conceptualizing. And this is the time for bringing those ideas to life. It's also a really good time for gentle communication, for problem solving, things like that. It's a time to avoid anything cold or cooling. So cold or cooling meals, cold drinks, heavy meals. It's a time to avoid stagnation. So we don't want to be laying around watching TV, not moving, withdrawing, because it's going to perpetuate that earth energy, which can lead to an accumulation of that, which can lead to depression, fatigue, feeling more introverted, holding on to the past. So we want to support that earth energy by moving and
Mm.
letting everything flow. And it's always about like finding that balance.
If someone was more kapha dominated in their dosha, would this then exacerbate for them? Would they need to pay particular, extra attention, similar with vata and then pitta as we move into the teal phase? Is that something that, women need to be more mindful of, which is why it's so important to have an understanding of kind of which dosha you're most dominant in, which one or two, or yeah.
Yes, definitely. And that sort of goes with the season. So each season of our year, summer, winter, autumn, spring, they're all dominated by certain doshas as well. So if you're more dominant in kapha, then you're going to have a predisposition to feeling an excess of that dosha during that time. So it's going to, if you don't balance it out during the kapha phase of your cycle or during the kapha phase of the year, if you're not working to balance that out and support it, you're going to feel a heightened accumulation of that dosha, which can bring you way out of balance really quickly. So it's more important for you knowing your dosha, where you're at within your cycle, and making sure that you're not perpetuating those elements, that you're balancing them out.
What about for people who are tri-dosha? How does it work for them with the menstrual cycle?
We've all got all three doshas within us in varying quantities. And when we're looking at the prakriti, which is our innate constitution, which is determined at the time of our conception, we can see sometimes that we might be dominated more so in one or two of the doshas. If we're dominant equally in three, which is very rare, but if we are, then we're kind of in a bit more of a safe zone because you're not dominated already by one of them. So you're kind of going to be aware of all three, but none of them are in dominance. So you don't really have to work too much with one in particular. More so than the prakriti, the innate constitution, we really want to be looking at and working with our vikriti, which is our current imbalances. So you might be born a vata child, but you might have a vata child, just for example, is born light framed, more petite, social, creative, but they might have a more emotional home life, or their parents might be going through a divorce. So they might start to, become an emotional eater. They might become more introverted. They might become more shy, depressed, things like this, which will give them a kapha aggravation. That kapha aggravation can last for 30, 40, 50, your whole life. And you might not even recognize that you were actually a vata by constitution, but you've been dealing with this kapha aggravation for so long that you identify with being kapha. Really, it's just this imbalance. So what we want to be working with regularly is our imbalances, where we're being affected, but where we're being thrown out of balance, so that we can bring that back into balance.
Before we continue with follicular, what do you most commonly see with women living in this modern era? What do you often see as kind of the most dominant imbalance for women in their menstrual cycles?
It's definitely vata.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, our lifestyle, this modern age, and it's go, go, go. We've got so many responsibilities. We've got so much pressure, so much movement. We're waking up in the morning, we're springing out of bed. It's like, most people are doing like kids' lunches, breakfast, organizing all the things, jumping in the car, racing kids off to school, racing off to work, working all day, racing home. It's just like all this movement. Movement is very dominant in the air energy. So that's the vata energy that throws our vata off. And then travel. So the epitome of a vata aggravating practice would be going on a plane. So you're going into the clouds and you're going extremely fast, extremely fast, pressurized, and movement is it's just this pressure cooker of vata. So we land and we feel like our head's in the clouds, we're forgetful,
Mm.
we're ungrounded, we're out of our body. So we
Mm.
need to make sure that we're balancing that out with doing more grounding practices. So accessing
Mm.
that kapha, that earth energy. So things like taking our shoes off and walking barefoot on the ground,
Mm.
eating root vegetables, which are literally grown in the earth,
Mm.
doing self-oil massage that brings us literally back into our body. So
Mhm.
once we have this knowledge, we can start to play around with it and experiment with it
Mm.
and utilize it to bring ourselves back into balance on a
Mm.
daily basis.
It's like the prescription should be whenever we go on a holiday, there has to be one day of just like spaciousness, just to ground into the energy of the space that you find yourself in, to ground back into the body, etc. Be yeah, there really is a rushing energy collectively that we have adopted that has, it's a real ickiness. I feel it a lot, and I really am super conscious of not being in the energy of rushing, because it does feel very aggravating to all areas of life when, particularly our collective nervous system, which I think is already so overloaded. So yeah, I really.
Yeah, and I think there's also this like energy around rest and recovery that
Mm.
seems to be shamed. It's like
Mm.
if you've traveled or you've moved interstate or you've been overseas,
Mm.
coming back and allowing yourself that time to ground and
Mm.
recalibrate. But it's almost like our culture is like, oh, what are you doing sitting around? And you don't need, what are you talking about?
Yes.
It's like we don't value the importance of rest and
Yes.
recovery. And that's why there is this huge vata imbalance, because
Mm.
we might be forced to do fast things and to have a lot on our plate, but we can balance it out by resting and recovering. And it's the same with our
Mm.
menstrual cycle. Um, how many women are confident to say to their partners, I'm not doing anything today. I'm
Mm.
taking the day off work, or I'm,
Mm.
not parenting today, or I'm just going to sit around and do absolutely nothing. And so
Mm.
many men would be like, oh,